Ryan Cross had been many things. He had been a journalist, a rogue informant, a whistleblower, a traitor, a double agent working for the Russians, but never truly alive since the day the agency decided he'd died. To everyone else, Ryan was a memory. To the world, he was ashes in an unmarked grave. To the agency in Amsterdam, a closed file. A cold case, and closed case. Marked confidential. What the agency didn't know was that Ryan Cross had been cloned. Ryan was cloned off the record, off the grid, by Dr. Naima Shale and her rogue experimental team. A quiet deal made in the dark corridors of power somewhere in the cold hills of Siberian mountains. In Ryan, the Russians wanted an insider. A reliable informant. The agency wanted deniability. Strictly off the books. And off the grid. No links, no connection, no proof. But Dr. Naima wanted proof that her sophisticated tissue sequence technology, the neural sync models, the stem cell matrices, the sync algorithms, and the neural control protocol worked. Worse, she said. Her command mapping. Turning people into programmable weapons. By turning a copy into a perfect replica just like Ryan Cross. Her first successful replica. The real Ryan Cross was locked up somewhere in a Siberian mountain facility, half-starved and forgotten after the cloning process. The copy, the one watching his own obituary on TV, was alive and free. But owned. And on the run. Ryan sat on the edge of his hotel bed, bathed in the flickering blue light of the television. With hand grenades and 2 semi-automatic pistols by his side. The broadcast hadn't stopped running his name all morning. So was the social media platforms. Investigators have confirmed the body found in an industrial skipyard as Ryan Cross, the investigative journalist linked to the controversial Project 54 expose. He muted the sound. Almost irritatingly, every news cycle was the same, a repeat, no new addition, yet CNN, BBC, France 24, Arise and Channel News all called it breaking news. Nothing was breaking about it. The photo on screen was over 7 years old. It stared back at him, smiling the smile of a man who hadn't yet learned what truth costs. Somewhere across Europe Fiona was watching this too. He could almost hear her beautiful voice saying, "They finally got you, my love. Rest in peace." He leaned back, exhaling smoke and regret. He wasn't dead, not yet. But he was close enough to feel it. Across the continent, another kind of ghost stirred. The quiet twin sat on a cold concrete floor, her wrists bound, her body shaking from a sleepless night. No windows. No clocks. No voices. Just the hum of distant machinery, the sound of science and technology breathing down the hallway and building. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. It was slow, it was deliberate, and it was rehearsed. The door opened with a hiss. 3 figures in white lab coats entered, their faces hidden behind glass masks. One carried a tablet, another wheeled in a humming device that blinked red with quiet menace. She knew the routine. Same room. Same questions. Same threat. Tell us what you know about the genetic sync error. She had no idea what they meant. But they did. And tonight, they weren't here for answers. Meanwhile, the world turned. In Nairobi, convoys of black SUVs sliced through the rain, carrying delegates toward a private summit. In Johannesburg, a jet refueled under armed escort. In Lagos, military drones drifted soundlessly over neon-lit rooftops. From every corner of the globe, they came, scientists, defense ministers, and ghosts with government clearance. All under one insignia, Project 54. The world believed Project 54 had ended years ago. But beneath the deserts, the oceans, the farmlands, and the cities, it had only evolved. This wasn't a meeting about progress. It was a meeting about control. Back in the dark room, the twin lifted her head. Her voice cracked through the silence. "Where am I?" One of the masked men leaned closer, voice flat, emotionless. "Nowhere," he said. And that's exactly how we intend to keep it. The next episode, titled The Aftermath. Fiona was the last one left to clean the mess. Amina and her handler were already halfway to the Netherlands on a classified flight, summoned for debrief after the operation imploded. No one at HQ wanted to admit how badly things had gone. Project 54 wasn't just top secret anymore. It was now in public domain. To the general public, the full details remained unknown. Classified. Confidential. Sealed. It was the weaponization of the human race against itself. It was dangerous. It was toxic. Every mission under its name ended in silence or blood, and this one had delivered both. Dawson had warned them. He'd called the intel unstable, the data corrupted, the chain of command compromised. But they hadn't listened. They never did. He'd wanted to run the op himself, HQ had refused. "You're too close," they'd said. What they meant was, "You've lost too much." His last mission with Fiona had ended in 2 body bags, one of them belonging to his partner of 12 years. The image of that explosion never left him, nor did the certainty that Fiona's hesitation had cost lives. She'd called it instinct. He called it incompetence. And he'd sworn that next time, Fiona be the one zipped into the body bag. Amina's history with him wasn't any better. Qatar. Kuwait. The desert operation. She still woke up some nights drenched in sweat, hearing the comms go silent mid-mission, remembering the voice that cut out mid-sentence. She'd nearly died on Dawson's timing. He called it discipline. She called it ego. Now she sat on a 7-hour flight, staring out the window while her handler snored beside her, the hum of the jet engines masking the quiet rage inside her. Somewhere below, Europe glittered, a patchwork of light over invisible borders. She whispered under her breath, a mantra she didn't believe but needed to say. "They think it's over. It's not." That was the lie they all lived on. That it was ever over. Because in the shadows of the world's most secret experiments, nothing ever really ends, it only mutates. "They think it's over," she whispered, eyes fixed on the endless darkness beyond the window. "It's not." Her voice was barely audible over the low hum of the engines. The handler beside her was snoring again, deep, guttural, rhythmic. It wasn't even normal snoring. It was a full-blown performance. That sounded like an old Italian locomotive. Amina pressed her fingers against her temple, irritated. He hadn't slept for 2 days, and she knew he needed the rest, but still, she hated snoring. Always had. Once, she'd dated a man who could have rattled walls with his sleep. The relationship lasted exactly 6 nights, 3 of which she spent wondering how something so ordinary could sound like an engine failure. The 7th morning, she left his apartment before sunrise and never looked back. "Tea or coffee?" The voice startled her. Amina blinked, realizing she hadn't noticed the flight attendant standing beside her, slim, immaculate, the trolley glinting under the cabin lights. "Tea or coffee?" The hostess asked again, this time with a bright, polite smile. Amina hesitated. Her throat felt dry, but her instincts were louder than her thirst. "No, thank you," she said softly. She hadn't eaten or drunk anything on a flight in years. Not since that incident. It had been 4 years ago, a flight from Casablanca to Istanbul. Routine transfer. At least, that's what she'd thought. The woman in uniform had looked the part, professional, graceful, warm smile. Amina had accepted the coffee with a nod of gratitude. Within minutes, the world had tilted sideways. Her hands went numb first. Then her vision. The cup fell, shattering in the aisle as the cabin lights stretched into blinding streaks. When she woke, she was in darkness. Not the kind you sleep through, the kind that breathes. Her wrists were bound with luggage straps. Her mouth sealed with duct tape. The air was hot, suffocating, thick with oil and dust. The cargo hold. She remembered the vibration of the plane, the distant thunder of the engines above her head. Someone had moved her down there, someone inside the crew. By the time baggage handlers found her hours later, she was barely alive. The doctor said the toxin should have killed her within 30 minutes. The agency said it was an internal breach. Amina called it what it was, betrayal. Now, Sitting under the sterile light of another aircraft, she felt her pulse quicken. The hostess smiled again, oblivious to the storm beneath her calm exterior. "Enjoy your flight," the woman said, moving on. Amina watched her go. The polished shoes, the neat bun, the professional grace, all too familiar. She exhaled slowly and tightened her seatbelt. One hand slipped discreetly into her coat pocket, brushing against the cool metal of the compact Glock hidden inside. She wasn't thirsty. She wasn't tired. She was waiting. Because every flight had its turbulence, and some of it had nothing to do with the weather. The plane touched down at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport just before dawn. Grey light spilled through the clouds, as thin as gauze, painting the tarmac in washed-out silver. As the plane taxied very slowly, Amina didn't move until the seatbelt sign went off. Her handler was still snoring, unbelievably, even as passengers began unbuckling and reaching for overhead luggage. "Wake up," she muttered, elbowing him hard enough to draw a grunt. He blinked, groggy, squinting at her. "Are we there already?" He yawned. And smiled. Hands stretched. "We've been there for 5 minutes. Let's move." He stretched lazily, oblivious to her sharp tone. "You're tense, Amina. Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm alive," she replied. "That's my baseline. Always grateful to be alive," she added. As they stepped into the terminal, the chill of early morning hit them, clean air, polished floors, the sterile smell of airports that reminded her too much of hospitals. 2 men in black suits waited near the arrivals gate, holding no signs but giving off the unmistakable air of authority you didn't question. "How are you doing, Agents Amina?" "Handler." The taller one gave a curt nod. Hands stretched. They shook hands as a matter of courtesy. "Director Dawson is expecting you at headquarters. Transportation is ready." And waiting. Of course he was. The handler replied. Dawson didn't sleep when there was blood in the water. This time there was. And more than enough to keep him awake, as long as he can. The drive to HQ took 40 minutes. The city was barely awake, the canals quiet, the sky shifting from slate to pale gold. They drove in silence. And it was awkward. Meanwhile, Amina sat in silence, watching the reflections slide across the car window, her reflection fractured by passing light posts. She wasn't nervous. She was calculating. She's had meetings with Special Agent Dawson before. Although it didn't end well. The handler kept fidgeting beside her, glancing at his phone, sighing like a man heading to a dentist appointment. Amina wanted to slap the apathy out of him. She resisted the urge to do so. "Relax," he said finally to himself. "They just want a debrief." She gave a short, humorless laugh. Dawson doesn't do just. The HQ building looked like any other corporate structure, steel and glass, tucked neatly into Amsterdam's financial district. But inside, the air felt colder, heavier. Security was tighter than usual. Retinal scanners, coded doors, the faint hum of surveillance systems woven into the walls. Amina could feel the tension before they even entered the conference room. Dawson was already there, back turned, hands clasped behind him as he stared at a digital wall map dotted with red pins. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Agent Amina." "Handler." His voice was calm, too calm. "You've had quite a week." "Eventful," Amina replied, removing her gloves. "You wanted a full report." "I did," he said, still not facing her, "but I also wanted answers to many questions." He added. He finally turned. His eyes were pale blue, the kind that didn't blink often. "I read your report," he said slowly, tapping the digital screen. "What you failed to include was how a 6-month operation collapsed in less than 72 hours. Amina met his gaze. "We were fed bad intel. I am sure you also read that in the report. Intel you didn't verify," he countered. "And now we've got a body count that includes one of ours." The handler shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Sir." Dawson's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't speak unless I ask you to." The man went silent. Amina crossed her arms. Are you looking for someone to blame? That's not new. I expected it. But we both know Project 54 is the real problem here. And the intel we got was bad. Dawson's jaw tightened. Be careful what you say in this room. Why? Amina asked. Because someone might be listening? They already are listening. They always have been. They know more than we have told them. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then Dawson exhaled. HQ wants this buried. They're calling it a procedural failure. Meaning? Meaning we're ghosts now. No records, no jurisdiction. They'll reassign or erase, depending on who makes the next mistake. Amina frowned. And Fiona? She's under observation. Until further notice. The handler finally spoke, his voice low. Observation? Or containment? Dawson smiled thinly. Does it really matter which one, observation or containment? As they left the conference room, Amina could feel eyes on her, the glass walls, the cameras, the mirrored elevators. Every reflection was watching her. Every shadow listening. Even the walls have ears. She knew Dawson wasn't finished with her. And worse, she wasn't finished with him. Because beneath all the politics and blame, one truth burned steady in her gut: Project 54 wasn't over. It had just changed hands. Kidnapping her twin sister had set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. What started as a calculated move, a means to an end, had spiraled into chaos. Fiona was now caught in a deadly web of spies, double agents, and shifting loyalties. Every whisper was a lie, every handshake a trap. The deeper she went, the more she realized there were no sides, only survivors. She arrived at the safe house just after dawn. The air was heavy with rain and the metallic scent of gunpowder. The front door hung from one hinge. Her instinct screamed before she even crossed the threshold. Something was wrong. The silence inside wasn't empty, it was waiting. She moved through the corridor, gun drawn, every step measured. The hallway lights flickered, revealing overturned furniture and splatters of blood across the concrete floor. When she reached the basement door, she stopped cold. It was unlocked. Pushing it open, she found the guards, 3 men, all ex-agents, trained killers in their prime, tied up, battered, barely conscious. The same room where Emma had been kept. Where is she? Fiona demanded, crouching beside the oldest of them. He blinked through swollen eyes, voice hoarse. They came out of nowhere. Silent. Precise. We never stood a chance. How many? 2. Maybe 3. Not ours. They knew the layout. They knew the codes. Her jaw tightened. Who sent them? The man coughed weakly, wincing. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Fiona's grip tightened on his shoulder. Try me. He looked at her, eyes wide with the kind of fear that doesn't lie. They wore agency badges. Her pulse spiked. Her own people. She stood abruptly, pacing, her mind racing through possibilities: betrayal, black ops, sanctioned cover-up. The lines between friend and enemy had blurred long ago, but this was personal. Her sister was gone. Again. And now Fiona was officially off the grid, the hunter turned liability. She looked down at the tied-up guards, then at the empty cot where Emma had been held. The air still smelled faintly of antiseptic and panic. This wasn't a kidnapping anymore. It was a message. She holstered her gun, her voice steady but burning. Nobody threatens my family. The words came out like a vow. She'd been betrayed by her team, abandoned by her handler, used as a pawn in a mission that was never what it seemed. But now it was personal. Fiona stepped out of the safe house, the storm breaking overhead, thunder rolling across the hills. The rain fell hard, cold against her skin, but she barely noticed. The game had changed. Somewhere in the shadows, her twin was out there, trapped between the ghosts of Project 54 and the men who'd built it. Fiona didn't know who to trust anymore. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the bad was about to get worse. Emma woke with a gasp. For a few seconds, she didn't know where she was. The air tasted sterile, recycled, metallic, and the hum of machines pulsed through the room like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She blinked hard. A soft blue glow illuminated rows of equipment, sealed pods, and digital monitors displaying streams of biological data. Her throat burned, her wrists felt raw beneath thin hospital restraints. A voice echoed faintly through the intercom. Subject EM31 has stabilized. Neural patterns synchronized at 98%. Her breath caught. EM31. It took her a moment to realize what they meant. She turned her head to the left, and froze. Behind a glass panel, lying on another table, was her. A perfect copy. Same features. Same scars. Same face, but no soul behind the closed eyelids. The screen above the other body blinked with a green pulse. Cloning complete, phase successful. Emma's mind reeled. They did it. They cloned her. It was supposed to be theoretical, impossible without consent, without genetic compromise, yet here she was, alive, watching herself breathe through another chest. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was evidence. And whoever they were, they had just rewritten the rules of life itself. She whispered to the empty room, voice shaking. "What have you done to me?" No answer. Only the sound of machines and the slow drip of fluid. On the other side of the glass, the copy's hand twitched. Hours later, alarms blared. The lights flickered red. The scientists were shouting orders, something had gone wrong. She heard fragments as they rushed past her cell, cognitive leakage. EM31's memories are sinking beyond containment. We're losing separation protocol. Then the power cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. When Emma woke again, the room was empty. The glass pod was shattered. Her clone, gone. The restraints at her wrists were unbuckled, as if someone, or something, had set her free. In the dim emergency light, she saw a note scrawled in hurried handwriting on the floor beneath a discarded lab coat: "Run." Half a world away, Fiona was already on the move. The flight from Damascus to Beirut had been long, dangerous, and deliberately untraceable. They'd changed passports twice, appearances 3 times. Each stop brought new disguises, new safe houses, new ghosts. Every checkpoint, every delay, every coded message carried the same question: was Emma still alive? Now Fiona knew the answer would be far worse than she imagined. Because Emma wasn't alone anymore. There was another version of her somewhere, walking, thinking, remembering. A twin beyond twinhood. A copy with access to her sister's thoughts, her pain, her instincts. And if the clone was loose, the world was already in danger. Fiona had gotten far more than she bargained for. And Project 54 had just crossed the line between science and sin. The lights flickered back to life, bathing the hallway in a harsh, artificial white. Emma pressed herself against the cold wall, heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it echo down the corridor. Somewhere behind her, a siren wailed, sharp, rhythmic, unrelenting. She moved fast but quiet, bare feet sliding over the smooth floor, the fabric of her hospital gown whispering against her skin. The air was heavy with chemicals and panic. The lab was different now, darker, emptier. Abandoned too quickly. Computer screens still glowed with scattered data streams, test results, security feeds, human DNA schematics. On one screen, a familiar face flashed. Her face. Subject EM31, unaccounted for. Termination order active. She froze. They weren't looking for her anymore. They were hunting it. The clone. And if the clone had already escaped, then so had something far more dangerous. She reached the security doors at the end of the hall. The keypad blinked red. She tried the handle, locked. Her breath fogged the glass as she looked beyond it, 2 guards, unconscious on the floor, their weapons gone. One of them was still breathing. The other. She forced her eyes away. Someone had cleared the path for her. Or baited it. She stepped over the bodies and into the next corridor. The smell of blood was sharp now, mixed with ozone from burnt wiring. The walls bore streaks of something dark, and on the floor, A trail of wet footprints led deeper into the facility. Her size. Her gait. Her clone. Emma followed the trail cautiously until she reached a decontamination chamber. The door was cracked open, steam curling through the air like smoke. She stepped inside. The heat hit her first, then the sight. On the far wall, scrawled in red across the sterile glass, were 3 words, "We are one." The handwriting was hers. Her breath caught. The clone wasn't just escaping. It was sending her a message. She stumbled backward, bumping into a steel table. Instruments clattered to the ground, syringes, clamps, a half-filled vial of something dark and pulsing. She didn't know what it was, but she pocketed it. Instinct. Proof. Maybe leverage. Then she heard it, the hiss of hydraulics behind her. The main door was closing. She spun around, ran for the exit, too late. The locks sealed with a mechanical hiss. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor outside. Guards. She searched frantically for another way out, scanning vents, panels, anything. A maintenance hatch near the floor caught her eye. She dropped to her knees, forcing it open. The metal scraped her fingers raw. A foul gust of recycled air rushed out, hot and thick. It was a ventilation shaft. Narrow, dark, but open. She didn't think. She crawled in. For minutes, she moved through the maze of tunnels, low, tight, suffocating. Voices drifted through the grates, clipped, professional, afraid. Containment breach on level 3. 2 subjects unaccounted for. Orders from command, lethal force. Her breath came shallow. The air was growing colder now, carrying a faint scent of rain. Then, light. A small opening at the end of the shaft. The night beyond. Emma crawled faster, every muscle screaming, until she reached the edge. She pushed the grate open and fell into the mud outside, gasping. The world beyond the facility was silent. A wide, barren landscape stretched into the horizon, no city lights, no movement, just the hum of wind and the faint gleam of the moon over endless desert. She was free. But not safe. Behind her, alarms blared again. And somewhere out there in the darkness, she was free too. Emma stumbled to her feet, clutching the vial in her hand. Her body trembled with exhaustion and disbelief. For the first time since waking up, she spoke aloud, not to herself, but to the wind. "You may look like me," she whispered. "But you don't own me." Then she started walking, barefoot, shivering, but alive. Somewhere far ahead, faint lights blinked on the horizon. A small village. A chance. She kept moving. Because the real Emma Armitage wasn't going to die in a lab. Not while her clone was out there rewriting her story. Meanwhile, somewhere across the world in a conference. They called it a glitch. A tiny tissue omission, a sliver of engineering that the lead specialists swore would be inconsequential. A hairline error buried in the mountains of protocol and sterile paperwork. Something no one would notice until it mattered. But the thing the sister didn't have, the birthmark, was the single fragment that made the difference. The underground conference room was built to be invisible, concrete ribs, no windows, and a silence the air conditioning could not explain away. Men and women in white lab coats clustered around a long black table, faces washed blue by the screens. Nobody smiled. Nobody moved unless they had to. Even the murmurs were measured, as if sound itself might set something off. A misplaced file, a missing data point, an argument about ethics, none of that mattered now. The prototype they had slotted, coded and emancipated to test in the field had gone missing. The word rogue hung in the room like smoke. They had models, feeds, risk matrices, and contingency plans. None of it mattered if the subject was loose. Time slowed as the door opened. He filled the doorway before he stepped into the room, tall enough to shade half the table, his silhouette a hard line against the corridor light. He didn't wear a lab coat. He wore a suit as if the suit were an extension of bone. Conversation throttled to a stop. Someone's pen dropped and the sound seemed indecent. He walked to the head of the table and, without a word, dropped a slim manila folder in front of each person. The folders thudded in the hush like small verdicts. Then he sat. The satellite imagery snapped alive on the huge screen at the far wall, folding the room into a map of catastrophe. "Play it," he said. Two men on the feed, command voices from thousands of kilometers away, began to narrate the night that had upended everything. Their footage was clinical: thermal sweeps, collapsed infrastructure, patchy security cams. The label at the corner of the feed read, "Rogue Clone, Event Log." One of the field officers cleared his throat. Subject EM31, prototype mirror unit, exhibited emergent synchrony at 2:14. At 2:18 we recorded an unauthorized egress from Containment Bay 3. At 2:22, secondary systems failed across sectors B and C. After that, we recorded 2 localized detonations and mass system overrides. All evidence points to coordinated extraction. A woman in a lab coat whispered, "Extraction by whom?" "Unknown," the officer replied. "But look," he expanded microscopic stills. "These are footprints. These are EM31's gate markers." The algorithm matched it to the prototype. On the screen below, dozens of tiny feeds blinked, labs nested in dunes, canyons gouged into the desert, fissures sealed into the earth. Delegates in remote sites watched from their own secure rooms, scientists, financiers, men in fatigues. The continent's infrastructure, stitched together by Project 54, blew up on a grid of tiny windows. He let the silence stretch long enough to be felt. Finally, the tall man spoke. His voice simply cut through the hum like a blade. "This is not a containment failure." He tapped the folder in front of him. "This is an existential breach." A junior researcher stumbled into a protest. "We ran the separation protocol." "You ran it," the tall man interrupted. His laugh had no amusement. "Which model? Which iteration? Which?" He flipped open the folder and his eyes tracked the page like a predator. "Who signed off on the tissue graft transfers?" Heads bowed. Someone whispered a name. It was swallowed by a dozen other whispered names. One scientist, older, with coffee-stained cuffs, said nothing, but his fingers trembled on the table. "And what about the birthmark?" Another voice asked, brittle with dread. "Why was it omitted from Subject B?" A murmur moved like a current through the room. The birthmark, an innocuous patch of pigmented skin, should have been proof of divergence, a biological fingerprint distinguishing original from copy. Whoever had omitted that small patch of tissue engineering had removed the failsafe. Without it, the clone could more easily mirror not just memory, but subtle biological cues, identity itself. The seat at the far end shifted. "We told you the induced pluripotent stem cell lines were stable," the chief scientist said. "We calibrated 2 weeks ago." There was no sign. No sign until there was, the tall man snapped. No sign until the prototype walked out and left us a trail of ruined facilities and dead guards. He leaned forward, and for a second the room felt like an organism holding its breath. The man's eyes scanned the faces like a prosecutor's. "If our investment in this program is to be salvaged, we do not leak. We do not argue politics. We control optics. We control narrative. We control who remembers." A younger delegate, voice thin, tried to pivot. "If it's in the hands of a rival,